The situation Tucker describes is quite simple. In this example, two individuals have just been arrested for stealing a car, which carries a sentence of 1 year in prison for each of them. However, the judge also suspects the two of being the perpetrator of a bank robbery a few months earlier. Such an offense could result in each individual receiving up to 5 years in prison. Yet, the judge does not have enough evidence to charge the two individuals with the second offense. The only way for the judge to solve the robbery case is to get a confession from one or the other prisoner. And this is how the judge decides to proceed. The judge isolates the prisoners in different cells and offers each of them the following deal. The person who denounces the accomplice will receive a reduced sentence. The person who remains silent will have to serve the entire sentence. There are therefore 4 possible scenarios. Either both prisoners keep silent and serve 1 year in prison each, or one of the two prisoners keeps silent while the accomplice opts for denunciation. In this case, the one who denounced is released, whereas the accomplice who kept silent and therefore who did not denounce is sentenced to 6 years, 1 year for the car theft, as well as 5 years for the bank robbery. The final scenario is that the two prisoners turn each other in, thus both facing 6 years in prison sentence, converted, as promised by the judge, to 3 years. And here are our two prisoners faced with a dilemma: keep quiet or denounce their accomplice. The dilemma is highly dependent on their inability to communicate with each other. In order to know which choice to make, they have to draw inferences about their accomplice's expected behavior. If they are perfectly rational, both prisoners should choose to denounce. But why? Because each prisoner will imagine 2 situations. In the first situation, the prisoner imagines that their accomplice will denounce them. They then compare the penalties for keeping silent and for denouncing. If they remain silent while the other person denounces, then they will have to serve 6 years in prison. On the other hand, if they also denounce, then their prison sentence will be reduced to 3 years. When the calculus is made 6 versus 3, the choice is easy and the prisoner opts for denunciation. Now imagine the second situation. The prisoners think that their accomplice remains silent and refuses to denounce. Once again, they will compare the penalties for keeping quiet and denouncing, and they will deduce that denouncing will result in an immediate release, whereas refusing to cooperate with the judge will result in 1 year in prison. Again, in this situation, the perfectly rational prisoner will opt for denunciation, which will get them released. In short, it does not matter if the prisoners imagine that their fellow prisoner will keep quiet or denounce. In both cases, the most rational choice is to denounce. Obviously, if both individuals adopt the same reasoning, the result will be catastrophic for everyone, except for the judge, as both individuals will be sentenced to 3 years in prison. The prisoner's dilemma has been applied to many areas. It symbolizes the very common situations where the individual interest of one person is opposed to the collective interest. For example, if no individual has a personal interest in paying for social security, the collective interest in having a good social security system relies on the financial participation of all. In divergent and conflictual situations, the prisoner's dilemma helps us illustrate several points. First, it helps us understanding that from a strictly rational and economic point of view, the competitive strategy is often more profitable than the cooperative one. Second, it illustrates that, however rational it may be, the competitive strategy, if adopted simultaneously by all parties, is in fact beneficial to no one. Third, the prisoner's dilemma teaches us that although the cooperative strategy is not the most rationally logical option, when it is adopted simultaneously by all parties, this strategy is conducive to mutual gains. Finally, the prisoner's dilemma warns us against adopting a cooperative strategy when facing a counterpart who is competitive. When such an asymmetry occurs, it is always the cooperator who loses out and the cooperative one who pockets the prize. The prisoner's dilemma has been played and simulated countless times since it was first articulated by Tucker. The results of the various studies carried out on the subject tend to show that cooperation, although irrational from a purely economic point of view, is actually often preferred to competition. Several theories have sought to explain this relatively high propensity for cooperation. One of these theories explains that behind a purely economic motivation, other motivations are just as important. These include motivations linked to the partner's relationship, but also to the ideological principle of justice and equity. All these non-economic motivations influence people's understanding and interpretation of the different options they have to make in the prisoner dilemma. It is those other motivations that lead them to move away from the rational competitive option and towards something that is more cooperative.